Okay, today I'm here with Vladek Filler. I had the occasion to meet Vladek over a decade ago. He was involved in some pretty complicated and nasty litigation up in the state of Maine, and I flew up with a couple of other people, and we had a chance to, that was the first time I had a chance to sit down and meet with him in person. And over the years, we stayed in touch and had a lot of common interests. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about this case of Christian Martin in Kentucky, and Vladek has been following this case in quite detail, so I will let him speak about where we're at today on that case.
Great. Thank you, Michael. It's very good to see you again. It's actually, believe it or not, it's been 10 years since you came up to Maine during all the litigation and the legal problems that I was going through. 10 years, that's a long time. I want to talk about Chris Martin case. If anything could get me to do a podcast or an interview, it is injustice. And I have to say, I followed Chris Martin's case for the past 2 years since he was arrested. I've kept an eye on it. I had an occasion to meet Christian Martin and his fiancée. We didn't have very much time that we spent together, but I did meet him. We did a talk together at an event, 40th anniversary, a celebration for National Coalition for Men. So I had a chance to meet him, and that's how I really learned about his case and the details of it. I heard him present it. I was sitting 10 feet away, and he told this whole story in 2017, and I urge your viewers to go to National Coalition for Men YouTube channel and pull up Christian Martin's presentation. And he spoke about a lot of things there that he apparently didn't get a chance to testify about at his trial. But and for further background information, I would urge people to go on National Coalition for Men website, which is NCFM.org, I believe. And they have had coverage of this case extensively. I think they have a new article up there right now, which is brilliantly outlines this case for background. It is a complicated case. I can give a very quick summation, but really it's...
I also want to interject one thing. I believe that anyone that has access to Court TV, that all the episodes can be watched. People could watch any part of the entire trial. It's available.
Right. And just to characterize this, let me characterize it the way the Court TV anchor characterized this case. He said that out of all his experience on Court TV, this is one of their main anchors. He said this is the strangest trial and case he has ever come across, and I agree. This case, this prosecution of Christian Martin, this is what a fixed trial and the 21st century lynching looks like. As you know, I have my own legal experiences. Just to give a little bit of background, I was involved in litigation for 12 years. I faced criminal matter in the course of my divorce and my child custody battle. I was dealing with many similar issues and problems which Chris Martin found himself dealing with the exception is there was no custody battle in his case. It was a bitter divorce situation. This is how his whole case started, and it went from that to his ex-wife making many accusations against him that turned into criminal and court-martial. In my case, I faced prosecution. I went through 2 prosecutions. I went through 4 appeals. I've had 3 high court state appeals, and I had 1 appeal that went up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals in the United States Court, the federal court. So I have a little bit of experience in these kind of drawn out, nightmarish experiences. I also know what it's like to face extremely serious charges, what it's like to testify. I know what it's like to hear guilty. I know because I went to that. In my case, the judge, because of prosecutorial misconduct, very quickly within a month of the trial, set it aside, the conviction. because there was just so much misconduct in my case. But nevertheless, the consequences of being found guilty by a jury trial are profound, traumatic. It is a horror show. So I relate in many ways to what I saw Christian Martin going through, because I went through many of these kind of things, and I understand the complicated dynamic that's involved here, which many people don't see and miss out on. So that is one of the main reasons I really wanted to talk about the case. I feel terribly what happened with Chris Martin. It's a travesty. The case and the trial is a travesty. And if you'd like, I can, start with how this case apparently went downhill.
Well, what I'm curious about is, if you refer back to the comments you made about the Court TV guy, because the Court TV reporter doesn't have any position on a women's group side or the wife's side or a men's group or anything. He's sort of an independent person that just has experience in the courtroom. So I'd like you to focus on the things that you believe even shocked this guy, that didn't have any male, female, family law, any kind of issue in the particular matter, but just looking at the substance and the technical issues of the case and why it drew such attention to him as being one of the most outrageous things he'd seen in his career.
Well, one of the things he mentioned, we have to keep in mind that Court TV in some way it's using the criminal process as kind of a tool for entertainment.
Yeah.
So they're talking it up like, World Wrestling Federation almost at times. So they're not going to, you have to be able to read the subtle, the subtleties between the lines, what they're saying. They wouldn't come out and say, this prosecution is insane. Like Christian Martin, he said, this is stupid that I'm being prosecuted. I agree. This was an insane prosecution. He should have never been prosecuted for this case. Charges should not have been brought forth. There wasn't sufficient evidence, in my opinion. Based on everything I've seen, the prosecution banked fully and solely on its power to have sway with the jury, with the court, and basically threw a bunch of things which have very strenuous connections at best to Kit Martin, and seeing what would stick, playing on the emotions of the jury. Back to the Court TV anchor, I don't think a single person that went on Court TV said that they thought he was going to get convicted. I think everyone that I saw, every expert that they had on, they spoke of either outright acquittal or at worst, it would be a hung jury. And that's the feeling I had watching this trial. There just wasn't anything there. The indictment that was brought up against him was based on faulty, some would say fraudulent evidence, and that came out as well during the trial. So there's questions: why was he even indicted to begin with?
So how did the jury get it so wrong?
Very easy. People don't understand. People have very high respect for the jury. They think this is a very sacred process, the duty. I don't see it that way. I've been before 2 juries. Juries, I think they're representative of a community. They're representative of the public. They're representative of everything that is fed to them through the mainstream media. So they're the product of our culture, our current culture. They're a product of, their communities, educations, expectations. And people, it's not hard to plan people's emotions. And when the prosecution walks into the room, the automatic default setting of the jury is, here are the good guys. They're here. They're protecting our community. They're here holding some criminal accountable. They bring a really tough case.
Yeah, unless it's political, like.
And this case says it all. This case, this Christian Martin case, and I thought that I couldn't get shocked after everything I've been through. This is a travesty. This case. This man should not have been indicted. he should have not have been prosecuted. He certainly should have not been convicted based on the evidence that I saw presented.
Besides people's testimony of what he said or someone said, even if it's the weakest evidence, what physical evidence was there?
Okay, so the evidence that, let's start with one clear piece of evidence that I understand was presented to the grand jury, and that was the notion that a cell phone expert made some sort. One of the experts, it was either, and it's not clear for me, but it was based either on the FBI report or an expert that the prosecution used, the state prosecution, the Attorney General's office, some expert for the state or for the government, apparently was quoted or was presented by the investigators during the grand jury proceedings that Christian Martin's cell phone data matched and put him at the location of one or both of the crime scenes. And that simply apparently was not true, because at the trial it came out that this was not true. And yes.
But even if it was, the crime scenes were across the street from his house.
Yes, that's true. I believe that there was some suggestion that there was another crime. There were two crime scenes. Okay? And just to give maybe it's best that I give a real quick summation of what the case is.
All right.
The case, very quickly, Christian Martin is going through a proceeding, a divorce, and it turned out not to be a divorce, because the woman he thought he was married to, he was not legally married to, because she was already married to somebody else, and she was later convicted, I believe, of bigamy. But it was a very messy breakup, and then the allegations began. This is nothing new for people who are involved in men's or father's rights or divorce proceedings. This is really standard operating procedure. When there's a breakup, and if it's contentious, accusations start flying, protection orders start being filed, restraining orders, protection orders, however they're called in whatever jurisdiction. And that is set off, and oftentimes the attorneys advise the woman to allege abuse and their benefits. In this situation, we're talking about a career military person. We're talking about a decorated veteran. We are talking about an American hero. If I recall correctly, his presentation, I believe the United States spent millions of dollars to train this man. And as this case pans out, everything has been used against him. He's been painted as, instead of a hero, he's painted as, Rambo, is some kind of a loose killer from special forces, because he underwent Ranger training. He flew an Apache helicopter. He did everything the United States asked of this man. He gave his life, 30 years of his life, to serve this country, to protect the people who convicted him. And so this man, everything he did for this country was turned around against him. And like many veterans, and I know of many veterans who this happened to, they come home, they find themselves in a very contentious divorce, child custody dispute, and the wife or the ex-wife or soon-to-be ex-wife alleges, though, this man is a killer. This man is violent. This man has PTSD. This man, he was a Ranger. He was a SEAL. He was a this and that. And all of these things are being used against the veterans.
And oftentimes it is the government that's providing support to the wife to make these accusations.
Especially now with our woke military. Now,
thanks to Senator Gillibrand and people like her.
I would say, I again will refer people to Christian Martin's own words in his presentation at National Coalition for Men's 40th anniversary celebration. It's on YouTube. I want everyone who's listening to this to go and listen to his presentation from his own mouth. He discusses how he was targeted. He discusses how the military went after him. There's financial motives. In the military, veterans are a target. They are a target by their partners. for cashing in on all types of financial incentives. If they can prove that they were a victim of abuse or domestic violence by a veteran or an Army career person, they get a tremendous amount of benefits from the Army. It is a lottery-like situation where it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're not talking about a little bit of money. So, if there's a motive there to go to the military and allege I was raped, I was physically abused, I was threatened. This is your retired piece of military hardware. You're responsible. Do something about this man. This is one of your. And the Army comes down on these men, and takes the side of the accuser. It is a horrible situation, and apparently this is the kind of situation Christian Martin found himself in initially. And so during this split up,
at what point did it become aware to the outside world that this woman wasn't really even his wife, legally anyway, because she was already married to someone else?
I'm going to rely on what Christian Martin delivered in his speech, and he mentioned a private investigator named Michael Parrotte. I think this man is an investigator extraordinaire. He was a former Los Angeles homicide detective, highly professional, and he became involved in Christian Martin's case in many ways, and he really opened this case wide with one of the victims. This is very important because the television and court TV, they misrepresent, and the news have really misrepresented the reality of why one of the victims, the entire motive, and we're kind of going back and forth here, but and I'm hoping that your audience are going to be a little bit more sophisticated and get familiar with the case before they hear this, or pause this and get familiar with the case, because we are jumping around and this is not being presented as well as it probably should be on my part. But one of the victims, the main victim that is being alleged, Calvin Phillips, that he was going to testify in the federal court-martial proceedings against Christian Martin 2 weeks after he 2 weeks from the time he was killed. In other words, he was killed 2 weeks before he was supposed to testify. And the whole notion is that he was going to expose Christian Martin, and Christian Martin's going to be in this huge trouble because of this one key witness. This witness was compromised. This witness was compromised by the private investigator. There were two private investigators that paid a visit to the victim, Calvin Phillips, at his home, and they recorded him. And that recording, whether he was going to testify for or against Christian Martin, that recording made him a starred witness for Christian Martin. He might have wanted to come in there as a hostile witness. It doesn't matter. He compromised the case of his ex-wife, her statements and her allegations, and he helped Christian Martin's case. So Christian Martin had an overwhelmingly huge motive to have this man come in and testify, not kill him. He needed him to rebut the allegations, because he made admissions on audio tape that was very helpful to him. And the private investigators got that information. So there's confusion about that, because the way the news reports it is, no, he wasn't going to come and testify for Chris Martin. He was going to testify for the court-martial. That's not how it really works. It's not that black and white. And neither the court TV nor the news outlets made that clear. What Christian Martin had on his hands is a witness that compromised his ex-wife's case and allegations against him, and he needed him. He compromised him, and he had him on tape, admitting that there was no allegations of abuse that she was making to the military.
So he is connected one way or another because of that information. But what about the other two victims? Well, how are they drawn into this?
So the allegation of the state's case alleges that Christian Martin killed this man because he was going to be a witness against him.
Okay.
And then he got walked in on the next door neighbor, who apparently the wife called and asked to go check on her husband because he wasn't available for some appliance delivery, and she didn't understand why that was the case. So the allegation is the neighbor went over there. He walked in on Christian Martin or somebody, the killer. He was killed. Then the wife comes home and she gets killed. So all these people beyond Calvin Phillips were collateral damage, so to speak. And this is just an extremely bizarre allegation when you walk through logically through the way this.
He would have had to wait a long time between. Usually, people commit murder; they don't sit around waiting for someone.
What they're alleging is that he was going back and forth to that house and out of that house, and in a small community, I believe that community, the testimony was that, or the records were that there's about 900 people. We're talking about a rural farm community.
Well, they showed the pictures of the house. I mean, it's in a a neighborhood that's not particularly populated, so you'd clearly see someone walking on the grass on the sidewalk. It's not like a dense city area where you wouldn't notice someone. You'd clearly notice people walking around.
Especially in the rural communities, everybody knows each other's business. It's a huge risk for somebody to go back and forth across the street, kill, go back to the house, go back, kill some more, go back to the house, set your alarm, go back to dispose of the bodies in the car. That makes no logical sense. And it's not supported by the information and the investigative data of the cell phone where Christian Martin was. Nevertheless, he was convicted. And I mean, we can continue with the evidence. I mean, there's just so many holes in this story, and how it went wrong. I'd like to come back for 1 second to something very, very important, and that is the way this judge handled this case from the beginning. Because I was looking at this case from the moment, basically, that Christian Martin got arrested. I was just following the news like everyone else. And this judge denied him bail initially, then set the bail at $3 million cash. He sat in jail, in the county jail, for 2 years waiting for trial. Even when it started to come out that the evidence that they relied on for the indictment wasn't accurate, the judge refused to have the charges dismissed or dropped. Earlier this year, I believe that they filed a couple of different motions for different reasons why these charges should be dropped. One being that this case was being used politically by the candidate for governor, who was then Attorney General. And this was his big press conference and everything else to announce that they had an arrest of a suspect. The other motion to dismiss was based, I believe, on the fact that the grand jury was presented false evidence about the cell phones where Christian Martin was. In other words, they placed him with that second crime scene, which we didn't get to discuss, but the bodies of the man's wife, Calvin Phillips' wife, his wife and the neighbor were disposed of in a different location, and the car was burned with their bodies in it. And apparently it wasn't very far from where the house was. I believe, alleged that the cell phone data placed Christian Martin at that second car fire scene. So not just the house, it placed them in a very separate crime scene area where the two bodies were. And I believe that there was some allusion to the two phones, her cell phone and his cell phone, being in the same location, which was also turned out to be false. And I believe during the trial, the state didn't even present a cell phone expert. They withdrew completely from that whole claim, which they used to get the indictment. It was only the defense that presented a cell phone expert that showed that his phone was nowhere near the crime scenes at the time. So this is a really, in a way, complicated case for people who are not used to following court cases or following these kind of processes. It might be complicated, but it is when you unpeel it and unravel it, it's pretty outrageous case. It really
What,
is.
yeah, the only thing that I knew about the case and that really made me angry in the same way that the Paul Manafort and Roger Stone arrests made me angry is the ridiculous theater that was used in the way that he was arrested. He was not arrested the day or the week or the month after these murders. He was arrested years later. He's living in a home with wife and kids. He had a job as a pilot for American Airlines, flying a full-size commercial passenger jet. This guy was not a risk, and he had a pattern. Nobody has a schedule more fixed than an airline pilot. They knew his schedule. They easily knew what city and where he was. They could have easily have gone to his house and arrested him. They could have arrested him when he arrived at the airport. If they thought they needed the extra drama, they could even arrested him right at the gate. But to go onto the airplane and arrest him, pull him out of the pilot's chair with a plane full of people, to me, that just told me everything about the political bullshit that was behind this case. Whether he was guilty or innocent or whatever, none of that was necessary. It was all theater.
Absolutely. Theater, and followed by a press conference from the candidate for governor, who at the time was really losing, as I understand, the primary. This case, as I understand it, may have helped him win. I think he won by the slimmest of margins.
Yeah, I heard it was like 1% or less.
Yeah, according to the National Coalition for Men article, I think they said it 0.04% of 1%. He by that little sliver of a margin, he won. And
when is he up for re-election again? Do you know?
I don't. I think that there's a lot of factors here, and I think we could spend 3, 4, 5 hours talking about this case. Okay, this is that kind of case, but I think there's some important things that that are worth hitting. Is where he finds himself now. I mean, this is a very serious situation. And one of the things that, I feel for this man. I mean, he was criticized. Even, it's so easy to throw stones at someone. He comes out and he came up and he testified. Do people have any clue how difficult it is for an accused person he was facing life? I mean, initially they charged him carrying a death penalty in this case. They withdrew that because they understood their case was just that, the juries might not go their way, knowing that, or maybe it wasn't political, or maybe it was opening up to more scrutiny. They backed off of that apparently sometime this year, in the past year. But initially this was a death penalty case. So he sat for 2 years facing these charges, carrying a death penalty. And but regardless, he life in prison, no parole, triple murder accusations. It is excruciatingly difficult to testify. What I saw, I didn't see a cocky man as court TV, and some people say, oh, he's too cocky or he's too this and that. What I saw was a man who was trying to be strong. What I saw, based on my own experience, I saw a man trying to carry himself with dignity and trying his best to convey his message in normal terms. People don't understand that, when you see, let's say, I'm not a sports person at all. I don't follow any sports, but back in the day, in the 1990s, when Michael Jordan was playing, I would sometimes catch one of his games on TV, and everybody was cheering for Michael Jordan, doing his last-minute shots and scoring. The amount of pressure, like all the basketball players, they can sink that ball into that net, blindfolded in practice. The trick is to do that during a game with high pressure. The trick is to do that under tremendous amount of pressure. Multiply that by 1 million. And you will now understand what Christian Martin was feeling when he was sitting there on the witness stand. He came up there, nervous that his life is on the line. and he's trying to convey his story in the best way that he can while being composed and dignified, which he was. I think he did a fantastic job testifying. I think that anybody who wants to see a real man testifying, look at Christian Martin's testimony. That was a real man with dignity who testified.
So where are the big normal legal watchdog groups? Why hasn't anyone got involved or jumped in here? Just totally from an apolitical, agender, a military point of view, just from a technical legal process point of view, because it seems like there's just endless errors, mistakes, misconduct that has gone on in this case.
Well, here's the reality that, as I see it, might not be the reality, but it's the reality that I see. We have a very high-profile case here. We have a jury conviction. So whatever whatever improper rulings, evidentiary rulings, which is the way the judges fix these trials. This trial was fixed by this judge. His evidentiary rulings are appalling. There is basis for appeals, several very strong basis for appeal here. The question is, how will the appeals court handle this? There's so many different dynamics that are at play here, and I'm going to try to be as gentle as I can when I speak about this. Once a person's convicted by a jury, this is a very different ball game. 90% of what is instinctual and what you would think would be helpful or relevant leading up to a trial to convince the jury that you're not guilty or to present your defense, all those things fall to the wayside. It is a completely different standard. It is a completely different situation. It is a much more difficult situation. This situation in some ways is a much more difficult than average trials. Appeals court will only look at a very narrow set of issues. That's not to say that wouldn't have any other options later down the road. But the appeals court will only look at what happened at trial. They're looking for violation of rights, prosecutorial misconduct, violation of rights, trial error, judge's errors, problems with evidentiary rulings. The judge did what went wrong at trial only. As one of my ex-lawyers put it, the appeal has only to do with what's within the four corners of the trial transcript. And I will add the docket sheet, which is all the procedural and hearings and all the objections that were preserved and all the hearings and motions that were done by the lawyers, which I, by the way, will add that Christian Martin's lawyer is an unbelievably qualified lawyer. He was an excellent lawyer. His closing arguments were a little clunky, but he was an excellent lawyer. He was professional on many different levels and very effective. But it just shows you have a great lawyer. You have the evidence on your side if somebody who took the time to actually understand what you're dealing with here. You're not dealing with heroes here necessarily on the prosecution or police side. People need to wake up. Prosecutors and police, a lot of them are far from heroes. Some of them are high-functioning sociopaths. That's the reality. Recently in an interview, a judge, I believe his name is Joe, maybe Black. I'm not sure of his name, but he was one of these TV judges. He gave an interview. He was in the legal system for 50 years. He was a judge, a TV judge at the end of his career, apparently. And he said, he had some very terrible things to say about prosecutors. He was saying something to the effect that the career prosecutors are just terrible people. Sidney Powell defended Michael Flynn.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could see that just from what's gone on with the 4 years of the Trump administration and the Russian collusion thing and everything else, and watching the way these people handled themselves and hid in evidence and made up evidence and lied and if one guy said he had a peanut butter sandwich when he had a tuna sandwich, they had want to put him in prison. Someone else was shredding documents and passing secrets, and no one even cared about that. So, I mean, the whole system is just rotten. But
there's a reason why George Soros funded all these district attorneys. The whole system depends on their judgment, their discretion, their prosecutorial discretion. They decide who's the criminal or not by the charges they file or don't file. That's why you see some of these rioters from the more radical left groups being let out without charges.
Yep.
And that's why we see, people on the right are being prosecuted and put in solitary confinement. I mean, these are the abuses of discretions and the abuse of law.
I wouldn't even say they're from the right.
I know.
They were just some wayward. It was from the mostly peaceful January 6th Insurrection Day idiocy, which is a total. Putin was great, I thought, in that interview with Biden, because he's like, you have 450 people locked up that basically went to the Capitol peacefully to complain about a political position, and you have them in solitary confinement, and you're lecturing me about our legal system and civil rights.
Well, let's, to bring it back to Christian Martin. Look, I was born in the Soviet Union. I'm a naturalized citizen, but I was born in the Soviet Union. Here's Christian Martin, who's a hero. He is a military career military man, comes from a military family, gave 30 years of his life to serve this country. He went into harm's way. He put his life on the line. After 9/11, he did everything he could, according to him in the presentation, to get re-enlisted to go and fight for this country. And this is the way he's being treated. This is the way a lot of veterans are being treated. I would like to know if there's ever, and God forbid, if there's a conflict. There's tensions all the time. There's tensions, we're not talking about Iraq. Let's say, a country like China or anyone else. Who's going to fight these conflicts if people like Christian Martins are not here? This is the way these veterans are being mistreated in the course of the divorces, in the course of any, by the military, by the woke military.
This is nothing new. This is nothing new.
But to bring it back, you asked me, where are all these advocacy groups that these watchdog groups in cases like this where there was such a terrible injustice done? This is a high-profile case. It's a double-edged sword, in my opinion. On one hand, you see a lot of people who see the injustice, and the other hand, some people will run for the hills when it's a high-profile case. But
this is not a national. It's not nationally sensitive. It's not really political. It's not like someone had a MAGA hat on or something. And even from the gender side, it's not even like a really great, feminist male kind of case. So, places like the Innocence Project, the ACLU, I mean, just from a structural legal issue, these people got to be seeing all kinds of problems with it, because you could just reverse the parties. It doesn't really matter, black, white, male, female. It just should. It's really a case about the system being screwed up.
Well, I don't know about these. I don't know. Innocence Project, I'm not sure. A lot of these organizations are political or woke now. And, you talk about ACLU. I hope all of those do get involved. I think Innocence Project and the ACLU needs to get involved in this case. And the way they get involved in this case, and I am going to urge this, if anyone's listening, they must be engaged to file a friend of the court brief on the appeal. They have to intervene in this case as friends of the court and file amicus briefs, because this is a battle which is very difficult. It's a difficult battle in the appeals court, and like I said, it's a very narrow set of issues.
That's why I asked you about the election, because if this guy is up for, I have like practically zero faith in the American legal system, like just one grade above zero. So I'm just thinking, how do you solve this, like commercially, from a business standpoint or from a political standpoint? If he won by that small a margin, I would imagine that the opposite party and perhaps the same candidate that just barely lost to him is going to challenge him again in the next election. To me, that's a much more likely way of resolving this problem than ever getting the corrupt courts, as from Sidney Powell's book shows how they go, because the governor can just pardon someone. He can
Can
you
imagine
commutation. He can do all kinds of things.
I'd like to, we are dealing politicians. If you look at the politicians, how many of these pardons do they give to people who are convicted of triple murder? This is a very, very polarizing and politically charged case. You have on one hand this family that is grieving and going to media and saying, look, this is the man who did it. We need some closure. I mean, the same thing they did to press.
But you have to have some evidence. You don't just get closure because Sally said something to Joe. I don't know what kind of a person wants closure. That's not closure. Because if I'm an intelligent person, that does not make me feel that I know who killed my loved one. That's not a standard that I would go to sleep at night knowing that someone is locked up for the rest of their life on just word. Because practically the most unreliable thing there is in the court system is anyone's word, especially nowadays. I want to see physical evidence.
Well, that's the problem. And I'll tell you, you talk about sleeping at night. I've had trouble sleeping at night because of this case. This case really upsets me personally on a very difficult and different level than most people, because I know how really wrong this situation is. It's very wrong.
And you saw how corrupt the government was in handling it.
This is, like I said at the opening, this is what a fixed trial and the modern day lynching looks like. Right here, you look at the Christian Martin case. We have a judge who is part of the prosecution team. This is standard operating procedure. He is okaying evidentiary rulings to favor prosecution. He's not even waiting for the appeals. He's saying, hey, this is going to be everything looked at the most favorable light of the prosecution. And by the way, that's on appeal. Everything that has been done, everything been done at the trial, they're going to look in light most favorable to prosecution. They're going to everything that was presented, they're going to view that as fact and absolute truth. So they are not going to weigh out the evidence that you have a problem with. They're not going to be the fact finders. They're only looking for narrow things. We need to get to a point here to redo the evidence examination. This is no longer where we're at. Once you have a jury conviction, it's gut-wrenching for me. It is appalling. Once there is a jury, once 12 people who've been kept in the dark, who have no idea what's going on. They have no idea all the evidence that's showing that he's innocent, all the evidence that it's implicating other people in their issues. You have his ex-wife and her son asserting the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in the murder case,
without the jury knowing.
And the judge wouldn't allow them to even know that this was that she asserted Fifth Amendment right, and he allowed her to.
Or that they even had to come to court to assert that right, which is normally the way it's done.
It's and I'm not sure what if that doesn't show you. I think. If that doesn't show you where it went, I mean, at one point the prosecution just, she was allowed to bring in bad character evidence against Christian Martin, which was completely irrelevant. I mean, this is a joke. I mean, she was bringing in during her cross-examination, hey, didn't you file some kind of a modification to your child support 20 years ago against your first wife? What does that have to do with anything? The defense objected, the judge allowed it. This is, while he wasn't even allowed to bring in evidence against an alternate murder suspect. He wasn't allowed to present all his witnesses in his defense. There's Sixth Amendment right violations here. There are process violations. In closing, the misstatement of facts and the false statements the prosecution made. I mean, there are plenty of grounds here for appeal and then some.
Well, I hope all of those jurors, including the alternate, at least some of them, sit down and watch the court TV episodes and watch the whole trial so they can see what actually happened as opposed to what they saw through their restricted lens.
And I gave a presentation at the National Coalition for Men that same time as Christian Martin did, and my presentation's online too. I talk about a lot of this stuff there as well, about these juries are kept in the dark. I mean, these are the way the trials are fixed. You talk about thumb being placed on the scales of justice. We have the prosecution, you have the police, and the judge putting all their elbows on one side of the scales of justice.
Well, yeah, and I have no idea what's happening today in the public schools. Nothing good, but I know from kindergarten through getting out of high school, all year we're told is, how great the American legal system is. It isn't perfect, but it's better than any place else in the world. Well, I've been to a lot of places around the world, and that's bullshit. Most countries would be shocked at what goes on in the American legal system. There's third world countries that have better legal systems than what we have. It's corrupt, it's unethical, it's political. I mean, it's real. Americans have this is the why I oppose capital punishment, because if you oppose capital punishment, people say that you assume that's like a liberal position. It doesn't have to be. I mean, there are people that oppose capital punishment for the liberal position. They think it's cruel and unusual. That's not my problem. If you could absolutely 100% know that someone, raped and killed a bunch of children, I don't have a problem with lethal injection for that. My problem is from a libertarian, from a conservative, from a practical, pragmatic point of view, that I know how incompetent every aspect of the government is, from the local county to the state to the federal government. And everyone forgot that after 9/11, there was a big fight about creating the TSA, because half the country didn't want to, politically, half the country didn't want to create another federal agency, didn't believe that the government was competent enough to check what was in your suitcase. Well, how can we believe that same government is competent to execute people, to kill them, to take their life from them? So I think that you can make an argument against capital punishment from a conservative position, from a libertarian position, or from an apolitical position of just common sense, that these bureaucracies are not competent. And even if they're competent, sometimes they're just evil and corrupt. If you look at some of the people that were involved in that investigation of the Russian collusion thing, and some of those people came out of the Enron thing, there's people that would have no problem sending people to the electric chair that were totally innocent. They don't care. It's their job. It's their career. They're soulless creatures. And it infuriates me that we basically insult all the judicial systems of all the other countries in the world by saying their systems are lower than ours. And it's basically just propaganda to sell people, in fact, so that when there is a verdict like this, that the public will say, well, there must be something I didn't see. Those 12 people wouldn't have convicted them if it wasn't really true. Which is was my reaction at first, because it's too horrible to think that it would happen to an innocent person.
It puts everyone in a crazy situation where, you almost wish that he was guilty, because the alternative is they're doing this to an innocent person.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And the thing is that,
and you want to believe you don't want to believe the system is that screwed up that literally a totally innocent person could be put to death or be put in prison for 4 life terms consecutively without possibility of parole.
And nobody, and you hate to think that, well, the state and the prosecutor and the police and the judge, they wouldn't do this unless they knew something. We have to trust them. We have to, people have a real misconception.
What was Sidney Powell's book? It was License to Lie, I believe. Was it?
I think something like that.
Yeah.
She calls
that is a great book. Anyone that has any thought that they know anything about the American judicial system should read that book, or just watch a YouTube summary of someone that does a summary of it.
There's a great presentation she made to, I think, Hillsdale. I think it's named Hillsdale College.
Yep.
And recently, and she was talking about prosecutors, how she calls them liars and snakes. She was a former federal prosecutor. My tongue.
I forget his name, but the former, the older senior senator in Alaska. The way they just railroaded him.
Yeah, Stevens, I think. Stevens.
Yeah, Stevens. Stevens. He's completely innocent, and that was all came out. after he was destroyed and lost his Senate seat.
Yeah.
And nothing ever happens to these people.
No,
Nothing.
Most of the time, nothing happens. And you mentioned a lethal injection and how these. Look, there was a prosecutor in, I think it was Louisiana. He used to have plaques. He would try cases for death penalty, and he would get guilty verdicts. And every time, either he gave it to himself, or I'm not sure the details, but he would have plaques on his desk with syringes on them to commemorate all the death penalty cases that he sent people to lethal injection.
Yeah.
Is that a normal behavior? When you have a prosecutor collecting, trophies with syringes on the plaque.
You ever see if people, I know this from my intern program. Americans are really unaware of how our legal system is compared to the rest of the world. If you look at all the countries in the world that have capital punishment, the U.S. is like with Africa, Central Asian Muslim countries, and China and North Korea. Putin's Russia doesn't have capital punishment. We're viewed like barbarians by the civilized world. There's no civilized country that has capital punishment in 2021. Most of them got rid of it a half century ago. Even after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia got rid of it. Ukraine, and most of those. The countries that have it are like Iran, Pakistan, some of the African countries that we wouldn't consider ourselves on the same cultural, educational, ethical, legal, any kind of, but that's where we are.
I'm not disputing, but I don't have a problem with American justice system the way it is written. The way the American justice system is set up, if it's followed, and if you actually do what is supposed to be done, how it's supposed to be done, if all the checks and balances are in place and are activated, then you have one of the best.
Yeah,
best justice.
It's a difference between theory and practice.
Exactly. This is where we find ourselves today. In 2021, it's devalued into a politicized district attorney's office, politicized attorney general's offices.
And what's happened is like the bureaucracy, where the Congress used to legislate and pass laws, and then they created all these different federal agencies. So now you have all these bureaucrats writing rules, and the Congress has basically ceded all of their authority to them. And all of us are living under like all these different laws and regulations that are created by people that no one ever voted for. And in the legal system, it's the same way. They have all these different local rules, and every different county and state has different rules and things that are all built on the system you said was so great, which was, but it's been totally bastardized by all this jiggering around by the people, the bureaucrats within the system, to make this new system that nobody ever voted on, nobody ever agreed on. The founding fathers certainly never foresaw this happening. It's a nightmare. The best advice you can give anyone is do whatever you can to stay out of the reach of the government, not just criminally, but in any way possible. The least interaction you can have with the government, the best off you will be. No, it's like what Reagan said. Remember that joke he said, that the scariest thing is when someone comes from the government and they say, "We're here to help you." I mean, that people laugh at that, but he was telling the truth. I wouldn't take things from the government, get things from the government, have the government do anything. The more you can stay away and live your own life and just be away from that, the better off you're going to be in most cases.
And I think that's where most of the Americans are. Americans are trying to avoid, and unfortunately, the problem here is we can no longer afford that. We cannot afford not to be involved. We cannot afford to just cover our ears and hope and put our heads down and hope that the government's not going to come for us.
Let me clarify what I said. I'm not saying don't be politically involved. I'm saying in your own personal life, try to avoid doing things that are going to bring you into a relationship with the government, either by doing something that is criminal or borderline criminal, or might be thought of as criminal, or even getting into programs, because you can see people get into programs, could be agricultural programs, easement zoning, and all of a sudden they've sold their soul to the devil. What they thought was a simple way to get a benefit for something, for a property or with this, that, or the other thing, you end up getting the government involved and it spirals out of control. And all of a sudden you thought, oh, I just need this and they're just going to do this. That's a good deal. It's not a good deal.
Absolutely. I know people.
But politically, absolutely, everybody should be involved, and they should. But you know what they should be before they're involved is educated, because we have a nation of too many idiots that don't know what the hell they're doing. And just like the jury, I don't know the exact joke, but it's like, how can you entrust the justice system to 12 people so stupid they couldn't figure out how to get out of jury duty? So, I mean, that's a joke, but there's some truth to that. I mean, you have people that really, if you look at their own lives, aren't really that competent to do much of anything, looking at it. And of course, and the media from right and left will both tell you the common sense of the average American person. No, this is a perfect example of the common sense of the average American person. And there's there's thousands of innocent people sitting in prison all over the country because of those common sense of the average. It's like what you said. I mean, they're affected by community pressure. They have all the ideology they're taught in school and they see on television. They have all this, they're all pre-molded into a certain set that a case has to just or it has to be political, and like the OJ case where they hate the government so much that the guy could be guilty and they're going to let him out because they just want to get the government. That's a different scenario. It flips the other way. But still wrong from a legal point of view. That's not how it's supposed to work either.
The whole system depends on an educated public. If the public is not educated, if the public is not confident, brave, even patriotic, and believing in what they're doing, the system, it'll fall apart, fragments. I went through the education system in Massachusetts. I mean, I went through some people would equate that with communist training to go to a public school in Massachusetts. I grew up in the Boston area. I remember the Reagan years when Reagan was elected and how the teachers used to talk about him in class, and really, after the 80s and probably late 70s, 80s, I mean, there was this death of the civics education of young, of children. We studied civics in elementary school when I went back in the day, but today people are kept. There's multiple generations of certain knowledges, responsibilities, civic duties, and educationally that are missing in young people's lives. I mean, I have children. I've raised my children as a single dad, and I witness what's happening in the schools. I mean, we could talk about that as till the cows come home. There is definitely the American people today are not the American people that I remember growing up.
No, it's a totally different country.
Tremendously.
Yeah,
there's no way the Americans of 1970s or 80s would put up with this. They would not put up with this. But today, I don't know what's happened here.
Sure, we know what's happened. You can go right back. You can get on YouTube. You can look up Yuri Bezmenov. You can watch his 1984 Warning to America, and you watch it, and it's like, holy crap, the guy was clairvoyant. I mean, it's exactly what happened. He exactly said what was going to happen. And he just was wrong in how long it was going to take. It took about 20 more years.
Right.
But exactly every single thing he said is going to happen, happened. And nobody still is doing anything about the schools.
No.
They're complaining about it. There's a little bit, they'll make a big little splatter here or there on trans people playing girls sports, something like that. But nobody goes after the actual problem of the fact that a huge percentage of teachers are Marxists, especially in the Ivy League schools. No one goes after the funding. No one takes it seriously. So
the establishment does not care what people say or want. We have a ruling class that is doing what they want, and we have the electorate, the public, who's not agreeing with this, who's voting in many different ways and trying to vote in many different ways, whether it's at the polls or with their money or with their feet. They try. A lot of people speak up and they're shut down. What we have is a top-down. We have an inversion of how the United States is supposed to work, how it was envisioned to work. The vision of what America was supposed to be like was not from top down.
One of the things that amazed me the most after I started traveling to Russia and former Soviet countries a little bit more than 20 years ago is the idea of people in the US, in the West in general, but Americans in particular, that socialism, Marxism, communism is about equality, equity, leveling the playing field. If you look at, because I spend a lot of time in China, in Vietnam, also in Thailand, which is a monarchy with a military government, in Russia, former communist country. If you really know anything about how communist governments work, how life was in the USSR, it's the most incredible classist structured society where the people at the top have all the benefits practically like kings and queens did, and the large group of the public are the peon peasants down in the fields making shit patties. And how someone goes to Harvard, Yale, Columbia, MIT, and comes out with these ideas, to me, doesn't just show propaganda. It just shows that we don't understand what actual intelligence is. We confuse book learning with intelligence. Dan Bongino's got a very popular podcast, and he talks about the really dangerous people are not stupid people. The really dangerous people are smart, stupid people. And I really disagree with what he says, because it's still complimenting these people that they're smart, but think in a stupid way. I had many students here from the top colleges, including schools like Yale and MIT. I had to fire them from unpaid internships. My ex-wife had a master's degree that she got in an accelerated program because she was such a good student, like straight A's, that she got her master's degree in like 18 months. In real life, she was one of the most clueless people. I'm not saying that because she's my ex-wife. I'm just saying she was book smart. She had a high IQ for learning, especially in that feminized way of learning that's not through hands-on practical experience of the world. This woman was totally helpless at anything in real life, a car accident, getting something fixed, finances, getting anything done. But she studied in her field of study and got very high grades and had a piece of paper from school that made a lot of money giving her that piece of paper, just like Harvard, Yale, and all these people do. So we have these people that Dan calls, the smart, stupid people. No, they're just stupid people that have an aptitude for book learning. Because I got a lot of students here as interns from foreign schools where they had to do an internship or they couldn't graduate. The American schools, they're just doing an internship maybe for some credit, but more often than not just for experience. But it's not, the school doesn't care at all. The school believes that they have all the value to teach the student and they want all the money and they don't really care at all about the intern program. But the foreign schools, it was a pain in the ass. I'd have to fill out just logs and logs and logs every week of information about what they learned in marketing or whatever it was that they were here doing their internship for. And without that, they could not even graduate. We're producing a whole generation of people with pieces of paper that really are not bright people, that can't really do anything. But we have, like what you said, this ruling class that's determined in order to even apply for a job, like at a Fortune 500 company, you have to have one of these coupons. It's like an entry ticket to get into a theme park. if you actually made a law that said it's against the law to discriminate against someone based on anything else based by their ability. In other words, if two people apply for a job and one person is a high school graduate and the other person has a master's degree from Yale, if you gave those people a test for your job and the person with the high school diploma got higher and you gave the job, to me, that person should be treated the same that if you didn't hire someone because they're black, gay, Jewish, or any other reason. Because I had to stop after 20 years of this intern program because of how ignorant and actually stupid these students were. And when I say stupid, I don't mean ignorant. I'm using those as different words. They were ignorant, but many of them were actually stupid. I'm absolutely confident if you measured their IQ was not average or much above average. Yet we view them because they have these pieces of paper from these list of special schools as the people that are going to run the country. And look at the great job they're doing. Look at what has happened to the country. Well, these are the idiots that are running the country.
Yeah, they've been rewarded with their conformity. What we're talking about here, what you're talking about here, is basically the students being like the jury. They're kept in the dark.
Yeah,
they're only shown. They're put on the blinders, and they're only shown to walk down this narrow path, and they do.
They can't think for themselves. When I went to school for 3 years in France. My father worked for IBM, and I went to school for 3 years when I was over there. And I had a teacher that at the time I didn't understand what his political feelings were, because that's how good a teacher he was. Because you couldn't know if he was liberal or conservative or Democrat or Republican or socialist or communist, because he's such a good teacher. He didn't let his own personal beliefs be shown at all that you could tell. And the focus of I loved his classes. The focus of all of his teaching is, don't assume that anything is the way it is because you were told it. Question authority, question it. Right, left, center, old, young, don't assume anything. Like Reagan said, trust. You can trust, but verify. Dig deep. Form your own conclusions based on fact. That guy was a remarkable teacher. I then found out years later he was actually, a very liberal, left-leaning guy, but he never let that come through. Nowadays, the teachers are basically wearing Che Guevara shirts and just indoctrinating students, and they have no ability to think for themselves. If you tell them women are paid 50 cents for every dollar the man is, they're like, It's like, you have Google, that actually there's only like 20 years of reports showing that's not true. They have no ability to think outside. They're just literally like North Korea programmed.
I see it. I have children going through the schools. I see what's happening today, and it's very disturbing. It's very troubling. I will backtrack a little bit when what you said about communism and such. It's an interesting point. The glorification of socialism and communism. All of this stuff has been tried. The transgender movement and the feminist movement and the gay rights movement. All these things have been tried. At one point over 100 years ago, before even the Russian Revolution, that stuff was tried. The whole theory behind it was, if you want to be with another man, if you're a man, or another woman, if you're a woman, or whatever, that is akin to being, with your, proletariat. They found some kind of a crazy logic to justify that as being part of Marxism and part of the class struggle. This was over 100 years ago.
Yes.
Before the revolution.
It's not new.
And people often say that there's no such thing as free lunch in communism. I disagree. There's absolutely a free lunch in communism. They're going to take my labor and your bread. They're going to make a very free sandwich, which they're going to eat, right? Or they will decide who to give it to. What communism did, in my own kind of retrospect analysis, it made criminals out of people. You could not survive. You could not survive unless you kind of had that double think that Orwell was talking about. Like
at every level, from the top people to the taxi cab driver, everyone.
survive, they had to have some sort of a game that they were playing or something. I mean, you wouldn't be able to get things unless you were getting them from the back of the stores. You know what I mean? Nothing was. You could have all the supplies of you want, but along the way, everybody would be stealing that supply. Everybody would be stealing those products, and they would be selling them out the back door. And that's why you'd come to the store and the store shelves are empty. Well, because throughout the supply chain, everybody stole it and sold it.
Except if you had the government connection, in which case they had special stores that the public couldn't go to.
True, and the government would they would skim. They would everybody. It's one of the funniest things that they used to say is that which was just laughable to me, is when in the early 90s, when the Soviet Union fell and there was all this disarray and people saying, well, the Russian people and the Soviet people, they're learning the capitalist way. I'm saying you have no idea how capitalist all these people, they have to be. They are, they're trading, hustling like crazy just to survive. They very well understand the free market system.
Well, this is what I blow up when I'm watching Fox and you have, you hear someone like defending the Silicon Valley people. They're talking about all these wonderful companies like Uber and Airbnb. I'm like, you people are stupid. Airbnb and Uber are just some assholes in Silicon Valley that stole these things that were going on in Russia 40 years ago. Uber is like, right, because everyone was an Uber driver in Russia. All you did is stick your hand out and the car stopped and you paid the person money to take you someplace. All they did is someone went on vacation to Russia once, saw that, said, hey, let's make a phone app for this. That's all. But it's the idea they came up with, like they discovered a cure for cancer or something. Same thing with Airbnb. When I started going to Russia, I never stayed in a hotel because in the communist system, it wasn't like the USSR was a huge tourist destination or even international business destination. So there wasn't the hotel structure. So when I first started going, hotels were incredibly expensive. If you want to stay like an American, European kind of hotel, it's like $400 a night because there's hardly any hotels in Moscow. And I wasn't going to pay that kind of money. So you did private apartment rentals. Exactly like Airbnb, but they were just Russian websites and you just rent someone's apartment. And so all Airbnb and Uber just copied something that was going on in Russia 40, 50, 60 years ago and that I was doing without them when I first went, when smartphones didn't even exist. But do you see the same? And this is why communism never really worked in Vietnam, because Asian people are just such naturally entrepreneurial little shop owners and everything that the Vietnamese are smart enough to just say, okay, we're just use this communism thing as like a marketing thing for like one party. But they never really, it wasn't like the Soviet Union where they actually tried to stop all private enterprise and actually tried to have the government make and distribute everything. They never tried to do that in Vietnam or even in China. And that is why those countries, that's why communism is lasting so much longer in China, because it's not really communism, it's really just a one-party military control where they're taxing private enterprise. Like, come on in, Apple, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, you just pay us the money, don't criticize the government. Come on, Disney, NFL, we'll all be good with that. Whereas in the Soviet Union, they actually tried to make cars and bread and airplanes and condoms, and then tried to figure out which town needed how many of which. It was just the biggest. If anyone, every college professor that teaches economics or anything should study that period of the Soviet Union, and then they should be brought in a room and given a test. And if they don't come out like the biggest anti-communist, they should be fired immediately and never be allowed to do anything in the educational business from preschool to college. They should get a job as a gardener or something.
We should, probably also, I should mention this, and the fact that communism survived in the Soviet Union for 70 years is a testament to the endurance and really the brilliance of the Slavic people. They subsidized that deranged system with all kinds of sacrifices and innovations. I'm not sure it could be done in the West. certainly not the way it was. It's not the way it was done in the East. But in the final analysis, we need to define the terms very clearly. What is communism? Communism, at the end of the day, is a form of slavery. That is all it is. Communism is slavery. That is all it is. It is not about equality. It's not about everybody's going to have a car, everybody's going to have a turkey, things. That's not how it goes. It is about control of the means of production, and it's about control of labor and all the resources. In the middle, it is the government, it is the ruling elite controlling you, your means of production. Your self-determination is in their hands.
And the basic fallacy that people have when they're like AOC and they're sitting there with their Cartier and their Apple iPhone and complaining about capitalism is they don't understand that if you want equality or equity, not equality of opportunity, but results, you can't raise everybody up. Because just take it in a very simple analogy. Running, okay? Like the Olympics or anything. If you take 10 people and you have them run 100 meters, all 10 are not going to run the exact same speed. You can say, okay, well, the ones that aren't running so fast, you could maybe change their diet. You could maybe give them some special exercise, increase their speed stuff. Yeah, but the fastest people could do that too, and then they get faster. Or it might not have the effect. In the end of the day, there's nothing you can do to make everyone go faster. But what you can do is make the faster people go slower. And
I want to interject for 1 second. There was a story written by, I want to say Ray Bradbury, I think, if that's the name, if I'm pronouncing it,
yeah.
If I remember correctly. He wrote a story back, I think it was in the 60s. He wrote a story about people who, in the name of equality, the people who could run faster or people who could excel, they were weighted down and they were held back. And basically they were forced to have a handicap.
But that's my point, is the way you reach equality is not by making poor people rich. It's by making rich people poor and even the middle class poor.
Right.
It's by lowering things. You can't make something from nothing, but you can make nothing from something.
But I have to say the idea of self-determination and the free market, I mean, it's been, and the way the economic theories is, nothing can lift people from poverty better than a free society, than free market. So there's a trade-off.
Yeah.
No one will ever be equal, because there can be equality of opportunity, but nobody can be equal. I mean, I cannot jump and score like Michael Jordan. I don't care what shoes you put on me. There's no way that I'm going to make the shots that Michael Jordan made.
And a lot of times when people criticize, first of all, it's ridiculous that people that support private free enterprise use the word capitalism, because it'd be like being a white person that supported Black Lives Matter and using the N-word to talk about African American people. Capitalism was a derogatory term created by Marxists used to denigrate free enterprise. So why people that believe in free enterprise would use that word, I have no idea. But a lot of times when people are attacking capitalism for the bad qualities of it, if you look at the examples, it's either not capitalism or it's the worst forms of crony capitalism. It's not free private enterprise. It's more like these European kind of stuff where it's these quasi-governmental bureaucracies, these giant corporations where you have like Amazon, where there's like less competition. It's not actual free, competitive, free market enterprise at all. It's like quasi, half socialist, half fascist mix of things. It's nuts. Like is Google, it's like Google. Free enterprise. Yeah, they got to a certain point, they kept on buying up all their competitors and making them disappear. That's not how it's supposed to work. If you're a fisherman and you can catch more fish, better quality fish, present them better, that's good private enterprise. If you make a little bit more money and you buy up all the other fishing boats and sink them, that's not how the system works. And of course you're going to have problems like that. almost all the complaints I hear about capitalism are these nightmare stories. I'm like, yeah, those companies should be broken up, or they should be. That's not how the rules go.
I have an even more jaded and cynical view. We're just, the public's just outright deliberately being lied to. Traditional things such as what is capitalism, what is Marxism and communism, what is up and what is down. It is being completely misrepresented and repeated and repeated and repeated and driven home. And our children, they're having that kind of an indoctrination take place in school day in and day out. And, we see the results. We see the results of what happens when people do not understand, and they have no tools to properly to engage in critical thinking. It is a very terrible situation. And at the end of the day, the entire system, be it the justice system in this country or the political system, the entire system depends on a very engaged public, very well-informed public. And when you have, one after another, each leg knocked out from under you, where your education has completely been perverted and subverted, where you have, the systems that you are relying on is not what you think. They're not at all what you think. That requires you to do work. It requires you, when I went into my situation with the legal process, I came into it so naive. I had no idea how the legal system worked. I didn't have that experience. Granted, I had some, traffic tickets when I was younger, but pretty much that's it. That's the extent of my experience with what the justice system is all about. It's just basically knowing that it's pointless to argue a traffic ticket. But in reality, it really is a horror show, especially today. And I want to bring it back around to the where does somebody like Chris Martin finds himself in this kind of a situation? His life, he was recommended to, I think 4 life sentences.
Yeah, without parole, without possibility of parole.
Without possibility of parole, and he's in an uphill battle for the appeal. And I have a clue of what his family is feeling and going through, but just a clue. Nobody could actually know what they're going through, and it's a horrible situation. I do recommend people, again, I want to stress, to see that the videos on NCFM, and not just Christian Martin, but one of his key witnesses, which was his fiancée, who testified at trial. Her name, I want to say, is Laura Spencer. She testified at the trial, and here's a woman who testified that he was with her the whole time. Is she naive? Is she incompetent? Is she been fooled or tricked by Christian Martin? Is she an accomplice? It's absurd. You look at this person. She's professional. She's she's teaches at universities, doctorate. She's you see that she had 2 teenage children from a previous marriage in the house with her. If Christian Martin was engaged in any kind of crazy criminal activities, any woman with, I don't care if she has not even a high IQ, in this situation, this is an intelligent.
The former bigamist wife said that he beat her, and usually people that are involved in that kind of behavior don't have it in one relationship and then not in the next relationship. It usually is a pattern of personal behavior that continues. So you would have thought that if he was that way and she was educated and together, like you're saying, that she would have been out of there. She wouldn't have put her children and herself in that position. If there was even a whiff of, we have to look at her also and say, well, this woman has a front row seat in those Christian Martin, unlike most people, and like many people, maybe any people. She would, a logical, intelligent, educated person, you're talking about a college university teacher, instructor. I think she's in medical field teaching.
I think she has a doctorate, was working towards her doctorate, according to the speech she gave a few years ago. I mean, we're talking about a professional, an intelligent woman. She will be the first woman to be out of there with her 2 children in tow if he was going to be engaging, or if there was any suggestion in her mind that he was involved in that. It's a very difficult situation. It's a very difficult case. I hope that they find justice.
Okay, well, I will take some time to put the video together, and I'll put all the links in the paragraph below the video with all the connections to NCFM and the things in the case so people can check it out. But I appreciate you spending so much time today. We've been talking almost an hour and a half, so I'll covered a lot of subjects, but we'll have a lot more to talk about.
I appreciate that. And, I started a small blog. It's on the vladekfiller.com.
Okay.
And maybe posting things on there. And if anybody cares to read anything or see anything that I say. And I appreciate this time.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, Vladek.
Take care.